10 years ago, the textile industry was ranked among the leading industries and markets for European recovery. It was 2007. A few days ago, 128 industrial associations from all over Europe signed an agreement pushing the European institutions to strengthen their commitments towards manufacturing in general and textile industry specifically. I think Euratex is one of the signatory parties of that agreement. So, very briefly, each of you should answer the following question. What is missing at the moment on the policy side and on the business side? Because everyone should take on their own responsibilities, and the business sector has, of course, some of them. What is missing at the moment that impedes or say, reduces the impact of initiatives like this that nominally reaffirm the value and importance of this industry for European growth, while at the same time we learned this morning that this is the second largest polluting industry in the world after oil, and nobody seems to be taking care, neither from the policy nor on the business side. So what is missing in your view? I would like to start, sorry, from the beginning, to give a little more room to Gwenaelle.
So indeed, Euratex signed with other 127 companies to ask for a better commitment from the Commission. But the problem is that even if we represent 177,000 companies in the world, the missing point is that the textile is seen as old-fashioned, and everybody's we sleep on textile, we are sitting on we're seated on textile, we wear textile everywhere. Everybody does that, but people don't really care. And even if we represent a lot of companies, and especially like 96% of small and middle-sized enterprises, the Commission don't see that. We are not trending. That's the problem.
I'm not familiar with this thing. So is this to promote the manufacturing industry in Europe?
It's about manufacturing in general, not specifically textile, but it's also about pushing technology innovation within European industries, such as what is called Industry 4.0.
For manufacturing industries.
For manufacturing. And also there is a goal of reaching back the target of 20% of GDP share for industry, something that resembles one of the targets of our project, which is to bring back 5% of unused production capacity from overseas back to Europe, focusing this time on the textile industry.
This promotes reshoring.
And this is a very recent, I think it was signed 20 days ago. It's very recent.
The question is, what's holding the Commission back in order to promote this case more strongly?
What is missing in your view that
why does not
might enable now to move from declarations of principle to actions and real undertakings in Europe? From the business side or from the policy side, if you were not able to move first, what would you do first?
Okay. So in order to bring manufacturing back to Europe, right? That's the main question. Well, the reason it's in the East, probably, it's because of low value added production in huge amounts. So if that's the demand, then Europe might be, in some cases, a bit too small for to have a really big manufacturing industry here. So it would be a lot more interesting, I think, on the business side for smaller companies, smaller brands that are not looking for the Chinese-sized factories, and if you produce in smaller amounts, you need to add value somewhere, because if you're doing the exact same thing as which is happening in Asia, like purely the CMT practices, for instance, it means you have to add value if you're talking about smaller production sizes. So in that sense, I would totally, I'm applauding your case, madam. So focusing on the quality of pattern making, the digitization of production, focusing on technological development, production upgrading, not in size, but in vertical integration. I think that is the business case for European production, and I think also Europe could stand out as a sustainable, integrated, completely integrated production hub. I think that will create competitive advantage compared to the Far East. And of course, China is in technological terms, it's highly developed. And I think in East Europe we have, and also in Portugal, Spain, Italy, we have chances to stand out in technological development in production, focusing on, again, vertical integration of production processes. So adding the stages on a very high level. And I think pattern making is a huge gap right now. I'm actually operating in Albania at the moment to focus on exactly this case, because they're like a very cheap labor station with very small size. So there is exactly what we're doing. We're adding pattern making and like technologically upgraded processes. I think that's the case for Europe. And if we can create that, that gives a huge value proposition to companies. And then it could become interesting probably.
Thank you.
I think there's a couple things missing, more on an idealistic level though. Just listening earlier today to some of the conversations, I'm really missing intrinsic motivation of policymakers. And, you know, if the people at the top are kind of looking at this whole notion of circularity in a jaded way, like, how must SMEs think? How can they enable future thinking if this top-down thinking is so like bogged down and, you know, almost is not seeing the future possibilities? So intrinsic motivation for me is missing for the policymakers. The energy to lead, you know, for someone to just be like, okay guys, let's take the risk, let's do it, you know, put your foot down, like be vulnerable in that communication of the triumphs and the pitfalls. We can only learn from each other, right? So I think that's also a really important thing that is lacking as well in this bigger movement. And the responsibility. Brands point at consumers, consumers point at brands, policy points at brands. Everyone's just like pointing everywhere, but someone needs to do something. And I'm a consumer, but I also work at a company. I'm also industry. You know, we're all something at the end of the day. So I'm missing responsibility.
Like I said, I'm part of the history of the fashion industry now. So I remember years ago when in my own town of Barnsley, we had a factory called SR Gents. They had 14 factories in the UK, and they made for all the production for Marks and Spencer's. And then they decided that they were going to go offshore and they were going to move to China, which they did. It wasn't long after that the company actually went into liquidation. But what we lost in that period of time was skilled machinists and skilled people who were trained. And I can't speak about Europe. I don't know what it's like in Italy. I can only talk about what it's like in Britain. So we lost very, very, very skilled machinists. We lost pattern cutters. An whole industry went out of the window with this kind of new thinking that everything must be done in China. I have got 2 young assistants work for me. One came from one of the best fashion colleges in the country, which is called the London College of Fashion, which is equivalent to Central St Martin's. And the other one came from Sheffield, Hallam University. Before Abby went to Sheffield Hallam University, she went to Sheffield College because she applied to go to Sheffield Hallam University and didn't make the grades. The best thing they ever did for her was turning her down, because she went to a fashion college that was thought to be third rate. So the only thing they could teach these kids was the technical side.
Yeah.
Now ask me if I've got to get rid of one of my assistants, which one I'd keep. Abby any day of the week. She can machine, she can pattern cut. The other one is creative, but can't hack it. He can't do it. So we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and I don't know whether the same is in the rest of Europe. But we've almost got a situation now where we've got to peel back all those layers, and we have to start right at the beginning again. We have to address the fact that we don't have any technicians, and I can be as creative as I want to be, but without the Abbey standing behind me and telling me that is doable or that isn't doable, I'm nowhere. I'm sure that if Victoria Beckham was here, she'd say exactly the same thing. She didn't train, I don't think, to be a designer or a pattern cutter. We're all designers. So I actually believe that we're at the crossroads now. And I would have to say that I don't think in Europe we're ever going to attract the big boys back. Well, I think because of the price points. When I knew I was coming to this conference, I went into Sheffield to a shopping mall called Meadow Hall that I call Meadow Hell. And I went because I wanted to look how H&M are operating. When they take what I'm going to be honest here, when they're taking the moral high ground of sustainability, that's not what I saw. That is not what I saw in there. I saw rail after rail after rail of cheap clothing that had been produced in India or Bangladesh or China or God knows where. And I think if we're not careful, a lot of these big companies are going to jump on that bandwagon on the pretext that it gives them a moral platform. But I think, you know what? It will be the small people who are manufacturing in Europe, not the big guys. It will be people like me who want to deal with the Europeans. I didn't vote for Brexit, by the way, and who want to buy our textiles from Italy and from Southern Ireland and God knows where. But I think the big boys are going to carry on doing what the big boys do well, and that's earning a lot of profit. So like I said earlier, I think we're on the cusp of something new maybe happening, a rumbling underground, where we've got the beginning of the new art deco, where the same thing happened at the turn of the century, where people were getting really fed up with over-manufactured things, and out of that came the Liberty Store. We got Fortuny, that Bill and I were talking about the other day, that if you ask about Victorian fashion designers, I don't know any. I know Fortuny, I think he was Italian. And there are still pieces around now which are beautifully constructed and women are proud to still be wearing. So I think we're going to get two levels here. We're going to get the big boys who are going to carry on doing what they do and take 1% of what they do and say it's sustainable. And we're going to get the small people like me who are going to bring back the bacon to Europe. And I think that's where we're at the moment, a new era. Thank you.
I think there's four things. There's skills, which we've discussed in detail, technology investment, standards, which the government is in charge of. I'll just challenge this scalability was the last one, but scalability, you know, fast fashion retailers of good quality, this is an opportunity for Europe. Look at what's happening in China. You've had the one-child policy Factories are closing down because people don't come back from Chinese New Year. I've had entire lingerie factories closed down because the lawnmower factory up the road was paying more. Just closed down because nobody turned up. Some of the regions in China, the wage rate is going up 40%. Some of the regions in China, the wage rate is going up 400%. China's in quite a dodgy situation at the moment. And what are the Chinese bigwigs doing? They're coming out of China, they're going into Myanmar, they're going into Vietnam, they're going into Africa. So we're in a state of flux, and therein lies opportunity. High street retailers, big bricks and mortar, is struggling at the moment. So if I don't need to buy 8,000 units to stock 400 stores, I won't. If I've got a website, I'll buy 400 units, and I'll buy another 600 of another style on the same 1,000-metre fabric. So the retailers, big boys, have got to be smarter, and that involves short runs. That is a huge challenge. The big boys need to do short runs. There's no seasonality anymore. It's got to be fresh, it's got to be new. Markdown is the killer. Markdown returns, as you mentioned. So that's a scalability scenario. Skills, Jenny Holloway, exactly what you're doing. I was born and brought up in Leicester, and 1972, the highest earning women in the world were in Leicester. Little Fingers, hosiery factories. All that industry's gone now. Coras, remember them? Mm-hmm. All that industry's gone now. My cleaner charges £12 an hour. In 1976, she earned £5,000 a week as a presser in knitwear. It was aspirational. It was piece rate. People could earn a lot of money in nice factories with high standards. It was actually quite glamorous. So standards, we come to that. Training people, we don't need any more designers. We need people who can cut patterns. We need people who can manage production. We need people who can work the new technology knitwear machines and mend them. We've got Shima Shaky machines in Leicester. We're getting knitwear in a week $5 cheaper than China, and it would take 12 weeks. So do the maths. What are we going to do? We're going to buy from Leicester. The technology has moved on leaps and bounds. So who's going to invest in the technology? Well, without the European funding, these manufacturers wouldn't have bought those machines. So we've got a hurdle to get over there. So, you know, we've got to shout at government for that. We've got to shout at the European Commission for that. Standards, ethical, has to be set. We have done great things in the UK with ethical standards. Leicester Council phoned me up and said, Kath, just had the ETI on the phone asking me to close down a factory because it was a bad factory. He went, it's not a restaurant. I've got no jurisdiction. How do I close down a factory because it's bad, because it hasn't got fire? The government doesn't do anything about it. If people aren't paying proper wages, then the government has to go after them. They have to police it. Scalability, collaboration. The only way this will happen is collaboration both in the supply chain and amongst us retailers. It's the only way we can get together to get the scalability. So I think I've covered off my skills, my technology, my scalability, whatever else it was. I didn't have a notepad. But having said that, there's a few hurdles to get over. The government, EU and the UK have to take some responsibility for setting standards, because nobody else will. And in the meantime, let's get stuff back into Europe because it's better and quicker than China.
I'll just say that my conclusion, my suggestion rather, and 3 or 4 sentences that I hope will sum it up. First of all, I believe it is skills, skills, skills in every manufacturing or making aspect. So I'll just quote from Apple's head designer, Jonathan Ive, who studied in the UK, says that he struggles to hire young staff as schools are failing to teach them how to make products. So this is something that we should never get the focus out of in front of us. So now, what happens with that? The thing is that how do you teach the skills? You need to attract the young students, you need to teach the trainers, and you need to think and consider new processes because you cannot do it the old way that supplied us those very the expert pattern makers. They will not be recreated in the same way they did in the 20th century. So there must be another way. We at Telestia, because that's the company I represent, we have really developed methodologies that we really overcome all these difficulties. We get in the 21st century, we make it simple, quick, and effective. And of course there are many proofs for that, but I will not touch that now. One thing that I will also say is that with all these, consumers have been overwhelmed by an overproduction of badly fitting garments. And the only way they can collectively express their fatigue is by their aversion to consume. And that's true. There are the returns, there is only the cheap, very cheap garments, there are very few people that will select your, pay your quality. And something else that I will quote from Dawn Foxall, who has the Textile Skills Academy in England. She says that fit is the most important factor when developing a garment, but this has disappeared from our high street with the emergence of mass-produced, like we said also, ready-to-wear fast fashion since the 1980s. In the world of fashion, we discuss zero waste. That's what we are doing also here. Although the industry continues to overproduce cheaply made disposable products, of which 60% ends up in landfill. Consider that about what could be saved from the color, the dyeing process, the fabrics, everything, the labor wasted, all the money that we spend. So this is really very important. And so I believe that skills, but we need to focus on how skills can really be transferred to the younger generation.
Thank you.
I totally agree. But the last 10 minutes, I keep thinking in my mind that the same word, competitiveness. It's really important. Okay, how are we going to compete with China or with all these countries? It's not enough. It's not enough to have the perfect product, or it's not enough to educate the young people. It's the whole combination. We have to sit on the table and we have to see in which subject can we be better than them. It's all about competition. Maybe we will have better skills, or we can educate better the young generations, or maybe we can have better leaders. But we have to find a way, we have to find what will make us better, and we have to work on it. That's my opinion.